Daedra is a term referring to the immortal beings that inhabit the metaphysical plane of oblivion. Oblivion is sometimes referred to as hell, in contrast to the mortal mundus and the divine Aetherius, also sometimes known as heaven. This biblical nomenclature continues, with the term Daedra often being used interchangeably with demon by Tamriel's populace, while the Aedra are referred to as gods. In reality, this separation is somewhat inaccurate. The words Aedra and Daedra have exact translations from Elvish, meaning ancestors and not ancestors respectively, as it was the Aedra that created the world, and eventually gave rise to the mortal races. This is where the actual distinction between the divine entities arises. The two groups had the same cosmic origin, but while the Aedra gave their divine power to create the mortal plane, the Daedra chose not to participate. The most powerful of these Daedra are known as Daedric princes. Often oversimplified, each deity is nuanced and complex. So, for example, reducing Sheogorath to funny cheese man is woefully incorrect. Each prince inhabits their own unique plane of oblivion, and also represents several abstract concepts, or spheres, which do sometimes overlap between deities. Like many aspects of the Elder Scrolls, the fictional pantheon takes inspiration from different real-life influences. And while there are no clear one-to-one translations, parallels can certainly be drawn between various Daedric princes and some of the mythologies of our world. While some real-life religions or works of fiction serve as clear inspiration, there are also some similarities which are purely coincidental, but are no less interesting. Within a topic as complex as real-life theology, I may have made omissions and errors, for which I do apologize in advance, and so be sure to leave your thoughts and corrections down in the comments. If you enjoyed the video, maybe even drop a like and subscribe. And with all that being said, let's finally get right into it. Azura is the Daedric prince of Dawn and Dusk, also known as the Mother Soul, the Queen of the Night Sky, and the Rim of All Holes? Okay. Generally considered a benevolent prince, at least in comparison to some of the others, Azura's spheres are vanity, magic, fate, mystery, and prophecy. Prophecy in particular being a very relevant concept in the Elder Scrolls III Morrowind, as it was she who predicted the coming of the Nerevarine, the game's protagonist. It was Azura also that gave the Dunmer the Enwa pass, changing the golden-skinned Chimer into the ash-colored modern-day Dark Elves, much in line with her domain of transition from dawn to dusk, from day to night. She is, therefore, and unsurprisingly, held in high regard by the Dunmer, who view her as a sort of progenitor god, not in the way that the Aedra are, but more so as a cosmic force that separated them from their Aldmer ancestors. The previously mentioned Nerevarine was the reincarnation of Indoril Nerevar, Azura's mortal champion, and it was the betrayal of Nerevar and the blasphemy of the Tribunal, his three closest advisors, using the Heart of Lorcan to ascend to godhood, that caused both the transformation from Chimer to Dunmer and the Nerevarine prophecy. Prior to the Tribunal's ascension, Azura was worshipped as one of the three good Daedra by the pre-transformation Chimer, along with Mephala and Boethiah. Their worship, however, was suppressed post the Tribunal apotheosis, with only the nomadic Ashlander tribes retaining their Daedric beliefs. Eventually, after the Tribunal was destroyed, as per Azura's prophecy, and many Dunmer returned to their old customs, the worship of Azura was resumed as the true way. The Khajiit also revere the Twilight Goddess, as according to their own creation myths, it was Azura that took the so-called forest people and shaped them into the modern-day catmen of elsewhere. To them, Azura is the goddess of magic, beauty, and prophecy. She is the mother of all Khajiit, and is the reason why the cat people are so obsessed with the moons and lunar iconography. According to the book Words of Clanmother Anisi, Azura taught the Khajiit about the moons, a central pillar of their religion, and gifted them their many various forms, or firstocks, which are determined at birth by lunar alignment. According to the very same text, it was Azura that introduced moon sugar to the Khajiit, and while this powerful narcotic holds deep spiritual and cultural value to the catmen, this makes venerating Azura essentially the same as worshipping your crack dealer. Azura's realm is known as Moonshadow, and while we have not seen it in-game, it is said to be so beautiful that it can blind mortal eyes. The plain is full of flowers, waterfalls, and pink trees, with Azura herself residing in a rose palace, served by her winged twilights. Azura's meddling in mortal affairs is not limited to transforming two entire races, as she also grants powerful artifacts, such as Azura's Star to her mortal champions, essentially a reusable soul gem. Nerevar, Azura's most famous champion, also possessed the ring known as Moon and Star, which lent him supernatural powers of persuasion and allowed him to unite the Khmer clans under his rule. Real-world religions often have deities or concepts representing the transition of dusk to dawn, as the day-night cycle dominates our lives to this very day, and even more so in times past, before artificial light sources. The ancient Greek pantheon has two notable figures, the titans Eos and Astraeus, the goddess of dawn and the god of dusk respectively. The two are married and represent the cycle of day and night, much like the singular figure of Azura does in the Elder Scrolls. Also prominent in Greek mythology is the deity Hecate, the goddess of the moon, magic, and sky, among several other things, but the overlap with Azura is hard to ignore. Funnily enough, Hecate is also associated with drugs, as it was she that taught mortals to concoct various medicines and poisons, much in line with Azura selling cocaine, much in line with Azura granting the gift of moon sugar to the Khajiit. The Hindu Rigvedic mythology speaks of Ushas, identifying with the daily light coming into the world, chasing evil demons away. Hinduism also has the concepts of devas and asuras, like Azura with an S, that represent dichotomy and opposing forces, much like Azura represents day and night. The Roman pantheon too has the dawn goddess Aurora, sounding a bit similar to Azura. And yet another possible linguistic coincidence is the similarity of the name Azura and the Slavic deity Zarya, another feminine personification of the dawn. The last potential reference to a real-life religion I will mention is the deity Ahura Mazda, the principal god of Zoroastrianism. The connection here is less explicit than the others, but aside from the phonetic echo in the similar-sounding names, both Azura and Ahura Mazda represent light to a degree, as well as cosmic balance. All these coincidences and inspirations can probably be attributed to the possible ancient progenitor of these faiths, the Proto-Indo-European dawn goddess, Heusos. I believe this is how it is pronounced. If there are any Proto-Indo-Europeans watching, please do correct me. Finally, to touch on other associated concepts with the goddess of the twilight sky, azure is a name for a light shade of blue, often described as the color of a crisp, cloudless sky, one of Azura's domains. The worshippers of Azura are known as Azurites, azurite being a real-life mineral of copper carbonate, deep blue in color. The goddess herself often appears as a blue humanoid, and the Dunmer, who she transformed, have skin colors ranging from grayish and green to, of course, blue. No prizes for guessing Azura's favorite color. Boethiah, as briefly mentioned in the previous section, is seen as one of the three good Daedra by the Dunmer, but while Azura can be considered somewhat benevolent even by mortal standards, the good adjective for Boethiah comes with heavy quotation marks. Literally known as the Daedric prince of cruelty and torture, the schemer and deceiver of nations, Boethiah's fears are deceit, conspiracy, murder, and treason, which says a lot about Dunmer society that hold her in such high regard. However, and in fairness, she can also represent less negative concepts, such as change, ambition, and tested strength. The reason for the Dunmer worship of Boethiah is that it was actually she that influenced the prophet Veloth to reject the traditional Aldmer Aedra worship and eventually leave the Somerset Isles millennia ago. These Aldmeri dissidents would journey to modern-day Morrowind and become the Chimer, and later the Dunmer through Azura's curse. Boethiah was so invested in this Chimer project that when the Aldmer god-hero Trinamac attempted to stop the Velothi schism, he was consumed, some say literally eaten by Boethiah, a subject we will definitely revisit later in the video. Boethiah, sometimes depicted as male, but more often referred to as female, is known to be destructive in nature, and is regularly the inspiration for mortal warriors. Her followers often engage in bloody competitions in her honor, with Boethiah seeing battle itself as a blessing. It is this aspect of her that is worshipped by the Dark Elves. The struggle, conflict, overcoming challenges, and strength in the face of adversity are key pillars of Dunmer culture, and it is Boethiah that embodies it for them. Just like Azura, Boethiah is worshipped by the Khajiit also, albeit to a much less extent, more so as an ironically noble spirit, and patron of warriors and exiles. And then, on the flip side, are the orcs, who absolutely hate Boethiah, as it was she that consumed Trinamac and cursed his Aldmer followers into becoming Orsimer, which is quite possibly the biggest nerf in Elder Scrolls history. While not outright declared as the enemy of the orc people, Boethiah worship is severely frowned upon, and is often associated with deceit and treason in Orsimer strongholds. Boethiah's realm is known as Attribution's Share, and much like its deceitful prince, this plane of oblivion is full of treacherous mazes and labyrinths, populated by vicious Daedra known as Hungers. It is in her realm that Boethiah holds gladiatorial-style tournaments, rewarding the victor with her favor, and often one of her powerful artifacts, such as Goldbrand, the Burning Sword, or the Ebony Mail, a powerful piece of armor that shields its wearer from magic. Boethiah draws from several religious and mythological figures. Being the patron of warriors, there are clear inspirations from the gods of war of various cultures, such as the Greek Ares, the patron of bloodlust and slaughter, essentially the raw force of war, representing the Daedra's violent side, but also Athena, his sister, who embodies the strategic side of conflict, in line with Boethiah's deceitful nature. There is also the Roman Mars, being from a culture heavily associated with gladiatorial combat, Boethiah's favorite pastime. The word Boethio in ancient Greek ironically means help or aid, which doesn't actually help me with my point, and not particularly in line with the Daedric prince's character. However, it does come from Boethius, which means heeding the call to arms, slightly more relevant. Even more appropriately, Saint Boethius was an early Christian martyr, who was tortured and executed for his supposed treason of the Ostrogothic king Theodoric, the betrayal and cruelty of the story certainly aligning more with the Daedra. Finally, it would be impossible not to mention the various gods of lies and trickster deities present in many cultures, such as Apathy and Dolus, the Greek gods of deceit and trickery respectively, as well as a certain Marvel character most often associated with this trope. The Daedra being a bunch of lying bastards, the Norse god of mischief will be mentioned time and time again in this video. Up next is Clavicus Vile, the god of wishes. While that may sound nice at first, remember that we are dealing with Daedra, and Vile is also the prince of trickery and bargains. If that's not enough to drive the point home, his realm of oblivion is known as the Fields of Regret, and it is populated by the mischievous Scafin, Vile's associated lesser Daedra. Many that bargain with the prince often find their wish granted in an ironic, twisted manner. The man-child of the Daedric gods, Vile finds eternity to be boring.
I am so lonely.
And entertains himself by meddling in mortal affairs, or simply observing them at a distance. He is one of the two Daedra that are patrons to vampires. While he is not responsible for their creation, Clavicus Vile graces vampires with their social presence and wit, allowing for the manipulation of mortals, no doubt for the Daedra's own entertainment. Vile is not only personified with his boredom of eternity, but also his loneliness across the infinite time span. Hence, in physical manifestations, he is rarely seen without his faithful companion, Barbas, who typically assumes the form of either a dog or a lesser Daedra known as a scamp. So strong is their bond that Vile often stores as much as half of his power within Barbas, leading to the speculation that Clavicus Vile and Barbas are in fact two halves of the same being. Vile is not particularly worshipped by entire cultures like the two previous Daedra, Azura and Boethiah, but rather by various sects and cults, as well as individuals seeking power or some kind of bargain with the prince. Much in line with this, Clavicus Vile seeks to maintain neutrality in the interplay of the Daedric deities, not having any particular sworn enemies among his, shall we say, divine siblings. As a sign of his favor, Vile may bestow his mask upon his mortal champions, essentially a helmet that increases the wearer's charisma. The Daedra may also grant the Rueful Axe, a terrible weapon that steals the strength of its enemies. It is also worth mentioning the famous sword Umbra, which was created at the request of Clavicus Vile to steal souls and send them directly into his realm. However, the original sword's creator tricked Vile into giving his power to stabilize the weapon, turning the sword sentient and giving it a will of its own. The most obvious inspiration for a Daedric prince of trickery and mischief is, of course, Loki, the god of those very same concepts. The Daedra's name itself may be a reference to the Norse deity. Clavicus, very similar to the Latin clavis or clavum, meaning key, and vile, being synonymous with the negative connotation of the word low, makes vile Clavicus low key, as in low key.
Oh my god, bro.
Oh, hell no, man. What the fuck? Shut your fucking mouth!
Another curious coincidence is that Clavicus bears a striking resemblance to the word clavicle, or the collarbone. Collarbone being a term for the human skeleton, whereas in birds, it is colloquially known as the wishbone, as according to popular custom, the bone of a cooked bird is broken by two people, and the holder of the longer half is entitled to make a wish. Wishes, of course, being the main sphere of Clavicus Vile. The anonymously written 17th century grimoire, the Lemegeton Clavicula Salomonis, or the Key of Solomon, not only potentially inspired the naming of Clavicus, but is the reason for many of the cultural demonic tropes we see today, such as the use of magic circles and influencing famous works of fiction, from H.P. Lovecraft to even D&D taking the names of biblical demons such as Ammon, Belial, and Asmodeus, popularized by the book. Finally, and still on the topic of real-world demonology, Clavicus Vile embodies the classic trope of the deal with the devil, much like the demon Mephistopheles from the famous tale by the German author Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. In Goethe's tragic play, Faust makes a deal with Mephisto in return for his soul, much like unwitting mortals make with Vile, where there are always strings attached. For this section, take a shot every time I say the word knowledge.
Knowledge.
Hermaeus Mora is the Daedric Prince of Forbidden Knowledge and the subject of 2 entire DLCs, Dragonborn, and before Online Isn't Canon Rage comments, the Necrom chapter of the Elder Scrolls Online. Known by many other names, such as the Prince of Fate and One Who Knows, Mora's domains are unsurprisingly secrets, fate, and knowledge, which I guess would make him the patron Daedra of this channel. However, Daedra worship is cringe, and the facade employed by Mora and his cultists that the Prince of Knowledge wishes to enlighten and improve mortals is simply Daedric propaganda. Hermaeus Mora, while not overtly malicious as some of his siblings, seeks to accumulate knowledge at any cost, and often at the expense of mortals, who he views as nothing more than instruments. His domain of oblivion, Apocrypha, reflects this focus. The realm appears as an endless, dark library of rotting paper and books, and those that venture within it often lose their direction, and eventually their mind. At least some of those books must either be authored by H.P. Lovecraft or contain the forbidden oriental art of hentai, as Hermaeus Mora physically manifests himself as a mass of swirling black tentacles and glowing green eyes.
It's called hentai, and it's art.
The Prince of Knowledge may also choose to appear before mortal eyes in the guise of Mr. Krabs from SpongeBob in that episode where he lost his shell. This amorphous form encapsulates the Daedra's inscrutability and inhuman nature, and is perhaps a hint that not all knowledge is meant to be understood by the mortal mind. Known as the wisest of the Daedric princes, there are also claims that he is in fact the oldest, manifesting from the throwaway ideas used at the creation of the universe, his very origin driving him to seek knowledge. The allure of eons of accumulated wisdom seduced many a mortal, and cults dedicated to the tentacle nerd existed since the time of the ancient Aelids. Particularly interesting are the Nords, who view him as a testing god, and Hermaeus Mora is the subject of many Nordic parables. Famously, Mora, under the guise of a hare, appeared before Ysgramor himself, who was hunting a stag. The hare directed the Nord hero towards the trail of his prey, claiming it was its long ears that allowed the hare to know the right direction. Ysgramor idly wished that his ears too were as long as the hare's, and in an instant they started to grow, becoming long and pointed. Suddenly a fox, possessed by the spirit of shore, leapt at the hare and killed it, revealing that it was in fact Hermaeus Mora, and then chided Ysgramor on almost turning himself into, Talos forgive me, an elf. The moral of this story is that I will always find a way to shoehorn elf racism into my videos. Those that achieve the favor of the Prince of Knowledge may be bestowed not only wisdom, but also various powerful artifacts. The most famous is the Augma Infinium, known as the Tome of Power, or the Book That Knows. Written by the legendary Xerxes, the scribe of the elven god Oriel, the knowledge within the book grants the reader incredible, demigod-like power, but could also instantly kill them. So, win-win, I guess. The cover is allegedly made from the skin of the elven races, which goes incredibly hard. However, one must imagine the smell. Other, lesser artifacts linked to Mora are the Black Books, which too contain forbidden knowledge, but also act as a gateway to the Daedric Prince's realm of oblivion, Apocrypha. The book-lined labyrinths are haunted by the many lost mortal souls that come to Mora unsuccessfully seeking knowledge. It is also home to the prince's many servants, the two most common being the Seekers, serving as Mora's scribes, and the monstrous Lurkers, who act as the realm's guardians. Also present in Apocrypha are dark wraiths called bookworms.
So the joke here is that it sounds like bookworm, but it's worm with a Y, like a dragon. Get it, guys?
Yeah, we get it. Thanks, Todd. The most obvious real-life inspiration for Hermaeus Mora is, of course, the Lovecraftian cosmic horrors. Everything from the design to the themes draws heavily from the Cthulhu mythos created by the American author. The tentacled, formless visage, insatiable hunger for forbidden knowledge, and the capacity to drive mortals insane all mirror entities such as Yog-Sothoth and Cthulhu himself. The realm of Apocrypha is reminiscent of the Yith, a culture of tentacled aliens that amassed knowledge by swapping minds with other creatures. Even the previously mentioned artifact, the Augma Infinium, is a clear reference to the Necronomicon, a tome of forbidden knowledge appearing in several of Lovecraft's stories. Hermaeus Mora has strong thematic undertones with Gnosticism, a religion, or perhaps a philosophy, popular in early Christian sects. The name of the movement originates from the ancient Greek word gnostikos, meaning having knowledge. Gnostics consider material existence to be flawed, and believe that true salvation can be achieved through personal spiritual knowledge, or gnosis. Only then may a seeker break out of the material prison and ascend to pleroma, a higher plane, much like the Dragonborn seeks the Black Books to enter Apocrypha and achieve the gnosis, or knowledge, to defeat Mirak. Linguistically, the name Hermaeus is rooted in the Greek messenger god Hermes, or to be more specific, in the Hermes Trismegistus aspect, which blends the Greek deity and the Egyptian god of wisdom Thoth into one entity. This figure is a source of divine knowledge, and the progenitor of a philosophy known as Hermeticism, which encompassed subjects like alchemy, astrology, and various occult teachings. Mora in Latin means delay, potentially signifying Hermaeus Mora's gatekeeping of knowledge, while in some Latin-derived languages like Spanish and Portuguese, moreno means dark-haired or skinned, perhaps a reference to the Daedra's color palette. In Slavic mythology, the suffix mora often represents some kind of nightmarish creature, such as mora, zmora, or kikimora. This term comes from the Proto-Slavic mora, which means bad dream, possibly originating from the same Indo-European root as the English word mare, as in nightmare, very much in line with the cosmic horror appearance of the Daedric prince. Hircine is the Lord of the Hunt, the Great Huntsman, also known as Master of Beasts and of the Chase, and is the radical centrist of the Daedric pantheon. His main sphere and only interest, it seems, is, well, hunting, an admirable consistency in a pantheon where gods have multiple abstract and often unrelated domains. Hircine resides in a realm creatively named the Hunting Grounds. This plane of oblivion appears as dense forests and vast grasslands, populated by various creatures, including were-beasts. Indeed, it is Hircine that is the progenitor of lycanthropy, a divine curse, or gift, depending on how much of a furry you are, that causes a person's transformation into a monstrous beast. Not being an outright malicious Daedra, as well as representing the thrill of the chase and hunting as a concept, Hircine is widely worshipped across Tamriel, though he himself does not seek supplicants. He represents the very essence of nature and the natural cycles of life and death, of predator and prey, and hunters of all races pray for the Daedra's favor at his shrine. In his hunting grounds, Hircine holds so-called Great Hunts, essentially a battle royale hosted by the Daedric prince for his own amusement, or sometimes as punishment against those that defy him. Occasionally, these hunts occur outside the realm of oblivion in the mortal realm of Mundus, at which point one of the moons, Secunda, turns red, becoming the blood moon. The unwilling prey for these hunts can be beasts, people, and sometimes even other lesser Daedra. Hircine is nothing if not a gentleman though, and a proponent of sportsmanlike behavior, with the law of the fair hunt always allowing for the prey to have a real chance at escape. Sometimes the prey may even turn on its pursuers, and it is they that become hunted, which Hircine always finds to be absolutely hilarious, and it's a sure way to earn the prince's respect. Those that do earn the Daedra's favor are blessed with gifts of powerful artifacts. The most well-known is the Savior's Hide, a piece of magic-resisting equipment famously awarded to the very first mortal that escaped the hunting grounds. Hircine peeled off his own hide and presented it to the champion, who had it fashioned into a full suit of armor, though only the cuirass remains to the current age. Hircine's inspiration is a bit more obvious than some of his Daedric siblings. Hunting as a concept is integral to early human societies, and many pantheons and belief systems reflect its importance by worshipping the personification of the hunt. Hircine appears to be a blend of certain figures from the polytheistic religion of ancient Greece, namely Artemis, the goddess of the hunt, as well as Orion, the mythical hunter and namesake of the famous constellation. The final inspiration from the old Hellenic mythos is Pan, the god of the wild, depicted as a satyr, a humanoid creature with animalistic features, such as goat legs and horns, in line with Hircine's appearance as a tall humanoid with a stag's head. Indeed, the blending of animal and human features is a common concept in many religions. From the famous Egyptian gods like Anubis possessing the head of a jackal, to the less prominent but no less relevant Celtic deity Cernunnos, the horned god. In terms of Hircine's great hunt, again there are clear inspirations from real-life mythos. The wild hunt, a very popular trope in recent fantasy, is a folklore motif occurring across multiple ancient European cultures. The pre-Christian religions of Germanic tribes, Celts, and Slavs share the concept of a mythological figure accompanied by ghastly hunters engaged in pursuit. The leader of the hunt is most often associated with the figure of Odin, the head of the Norse pantheon, which also has Ullr, a deity associated with hunting, and also the god of skiing apparently. He was featured in the 13th century works Prose Edda and Heimskringla, which compile ancient Norse sagas. Also appearing in these texts is the Jotun goddess Skadi, the patron of hunting and, again, skiing. You guys really like your winter sports, huh? The lycanthropy aspect of Hircine too draws from the many folklore elements of werewolves, changelings, and so on. From the famous skinwalkers of the Native American Navajo lore to the classical werewolves of Indo-European cultures, shapeshifters in various forms have been present across multiple human cultures since before recorded history. Finally, the name Hircine and its meaning. A one-to-one spelling, but pronounced as Hircine, as some AI channels that say Cyrodiil or Kvatch might pronounce it. The word is an adjective used to describe a noun relating to a goat, or having a goatish odor. Funnily enough, it is also used as a synonym with lustful or libidinous, in line with the many of real-life hunter gods such as Artemis being also associated with fertility. Malacath was previously mentioned in this video, but by a different name. Originally known as Trinamach, Malacath is the prince of lies, deception, and hypocrisy. He is the vengeful god of curses, of monsters, the furious one, he who speaks sideways, and the defender of the betrayed. His spheres are curses, broken promises, and anguish, yet he is also the patron of the marginalized folk of Tamriel, those spurned and ostracized by the other races, such as goblins, ogres, and even objectively highly intelligent and civilized orcs, Malacath hence displaying a curious dichotomy of good and evil, often seen in even the most seemingly irredeemable of Daedra. Malacath is an interesting case of a Daedric prince with a non-Daedric origin, a trait shared with very few of his other divine colleagues. Several myths exist of Malacath's creation, the truth being ultimately unclear and hotly debated. They do all agree on one thing, however. Malacath is the changed form of the Aldmeri god-hero Trinimac, the greatest of their warriors. How the change came about is the subject of the debate. The most popular theory suggests that Trinimac, in an attempt to stop the prophet Veloth and his followers from splintering from Aldmeri society, was consumed by the Daedric prince Boethiah. While this consumption may be interpreted metaphorically, as for example a corrupting influence, some legends maintain that Boethiah physically vored Trinimac and then took a giant shit directly in front of his shocked followers. The gigantic pile of excrement became Malacath, and his closest followers too were corrupted from Aldmer into the Orsimer. With an origin story like that, no wonder Malacath is so angry all the time. The orcs, for obvious reasons, have a different myth of their patron deity's birth. In their telling, Trinimac totally 1v1'd Boethiah and was about to deliver the final blow when he got third-partied by the Daedric prince Mephala, who stabbed him in the back. Boethiah then invoked a ritual to corrupt Trinimac and banish him to a place of ash, which became his realm of oblivion. Regardless of which version, if any, are true, Malacath's dubious origins lead him to being regarded as lesser by some of his Daedric kin, and sometimes not recognized as a prince at all. A clear reflection of his Orsimer followers and their treatment at the hands of the other mortal races of Tamriel. Despite this, and much like his pariah progeny, Malacath is indeed a force to be reckoned with, and his power is begrudgingly recognized by the other Daedra. Malacath's realm is known as Ashpit, and much like the name suggests, consists of dust, smoke, and, well, ash. Curiously, in this apocalyptic wasteland, there is a garden of slender trees, with vines and lily-like flowers, apparently holding some significance to Malacath, who himself describes it as a shadow and an echo of something that once was. The souls of those orcs that revere Malacath go directly into the ash pit. Indeed, and unsurprisingly, the worship of the Daedra is widespread among the Orsimer, with Malacath being both the progenitor and patron of the race. The Prince of Curses is also worshipped by the Goblin Ken races, which includes goblins, ogres, and the like, and he is even revered by some Reachmen in Skyrim's western regions. A mortal champion of the cursed god may be granted several boons, among which is the famous warhammer Volendrung, which steals the strength of its enemies. The mighty weapon was in fact forged by the Dwemer, and yet somehow, the Dwarven Hammer became a Daedric artifact, giving rise to speculations and theories as to the link between the long-lost race and the God of Lies, something I spoke at length about in this video. Malacath and his theme of exile, shame, and transformation draws on several real-life inspirations. Surprisingly, there are deep similarities with the Greek god of smiths and artisans, Hephaestus. The son of Hera and potentially Zeus, he was cast off Mount Olympus, a process which crippled him with lameness as he fell onto the Isle of Lemnos. Despite his disability, Hephaestus became a craftsman of incredible skill and forged weapons for the gods themselves. This tale is quite reminiscent of the Daedric Trinimac being corrupted, or crippled, by Boethiah, and cast out of Aldmeris with his Orsimer followers, who are coincidentally renowned as the best smiths in Tamriel. The transformed Malacath, enraged and bitter, became the god of vengeance, which again has a counterpart within the extensive pantheon of ancient Greece. The goddess Nemesis personifies retribution, justice, and punishment for hubris. Both can be seen as arbiters of justice, but while Nemesis maintains balance, the Daedric prince is more so inclined to personal revenge for wrongdoings. Some Abrahamic parallels are visible in Malacath's story too. The fall from grace and exile from paradise is much similar to the story of Lucifer, the biblical devil himself. Once one of the most radiant of the angels, Lucifer fell from heaven, becoming Satan and the ruler of hell, much like Trinimach, the greatest knight of Aldmeris, transforming into the demonic Malacath, the lord of Ashpit. Both entities represent a humiliating fall from grace, a corrupt new identity, and an existence outside a divine order, Lucifer shunned by the angels, and Malacath by the other Daedra. As for the name Malacath, it has several inspirations. Very phonetically similar is Moloch, a deity appearing in the Book of Leviticus of the Hebrew Bible. According to the Old Testament, Moloch is a foreign and dark god, demanding human sacrifices. Often described as a demon, sometimes even alongside the previously mentioned Lucifer, like in John Milton's epic poem Paradise Lost, which depicts Moloch as one of the greatest warriors of the fallen angels, vengeful and militant, echoing Trinimach's role in Aldmeris. Further speculating, the name Malacath can be separated into two parts. Mal, meaning evil or bad in Latin and some Latin-derived languages, and Ka, meaning battle in the language of my beautiful homeland. Also, Malakas just means like wanker or asshole in Greek, which I doubt is the inspiration for the name, but it is kind of fitting. Finally, malachite is an opaque mineral of copper carbonate hydroxide, green in color, much like the skin of the Orsimer, children of Malacath. The Prince of Destruction and Lord of Disaster is one of the most recognizable Daedric gods within the Elder Scrolls, appearing in and often being one of the main antagonists of several entries into the game series. Representing the spheres of darkness, destruction, and ambition, Mehrunes Dagon is also often associated with natural disasters like fires and earthquakes, making his main theme quite clear: change. And while other Daedra too represent this concept in their own ways, like Azura and the theme of transformation, or the scheming Boethiah and her dark plots, Mehrunes Dagon approach is a lot less subtle. He is the deity of chaos, of upheaval and revolution, representing the, unfortunately rather common element of violence within change. Dagon resides in the Deadlands, his own pocket realm, and it is the Deadlands that truly justify Oblivion being referred to as Hell by some mortals. The classical infernal landscape is rife with oceans of lava, scorched volcanic islands, and dark, imposing structures. Various demonic creatures roam the landscape, like the native Scamps, but it is the Dremora clans loyal to Dagon that are at the top of the hierarchy. The Deadlands are the Daedric realm where we probably spend the most time in the game series, and let me tell you, 12-year-old me was absolutely shitting myself in 2006 when you had to go to actual hell to close the Oblivion gates. One would assume that a deity as destructive and malevolent as Dagon would not have much of a following among the mortal races.
But why? Why would you do that? Why would you do any of that?
but unfortunately, that is incorrect. While in most cultures, Dagon is rightfully viewed as a force of evil, multiple cults have formed over the years, most famously the mythic Dawn, who caused the Oblivion Crisis. Believing that the mortal realm of Mundus was actually a plane of oblivion of the trickster god Lorcan, who was betrayed by the Aedra, and the divine spark was removed from his children, turning them into mortals that inhabit Tamriel. The cult therefore believed that eroding the barrier between the physical and the Daedric realm would, quote-unquote, liberate Tamriel from this prison. Dagon was only too glad to fulfill his thirst for destruction, and flooded Tamriel with his Daedra, before finally entering the mortal realm himself, only to lose a 1v1 to Akatosh.
It was under the chin press. Oh, this is tight.
Among several artifacts associated with the Daedric Prince of Ambition is the so-called Mehrunes Razor, a powerful dagger that can potentially one-shot any target, while sending their soul to the Deadlands. More importantly, however, is the Mysterium Xarxes, a book written by Dagon himself, and what is essentially the Mein Kampf of the Elder Scrolls universe. It is the influence of this piece of literature that inspired Mankar Cameron to create the previously mentioned Mythic Dawn cult and engage in absolute school shooter behavior, attempting to unmake Tamriel as a whole. Bethesda leaned hard into the conventional devil theme for Mehrunes Dagon, from the hellish landscape of the Deadlands to the Daedric Prince's appearance being very similar to the demonic archetype, complete with horns and red skin, being worshipped by illegal satanic cults. Christian mythos aside, deities representing destruction are common across multiple pantheons. The biggest correlation is between Mehrunes Dagon and the Jotun Surtur from the Old Norse mythology. As described in the Poetic Edda, the previously mentioned source of much of our knowledge about the Scandinavian pantheon, Surtur is the greatest of the fire giants. He carries a flaming sword, and is one of the central figures of Ragnarok, as he is foretold to battle against the gods and bring forth the flames that will destroy the earth. It is also interesting to note that Surtur in Old Norse means black, with one of Dagon's titles being the Black Daedra Lord. Aside from this more obvious influence, other somewhat similar deities dealing with destruction are the Egyptian goddess Sekhmet, said to breathe fire and cause plagues, as well as the destructive aspect of Shiva, one of the central Hindu deities, who embodies destruction as a means of change. As for the name, Dagon is lifted directly from the Semitic god of the same name, worshipped in the ancient Near East. However, this was more of a benevolent deity, covering the domains of fertility and agriculture. H.P. Lovecraft, too, is guilty of twisting the seemingly innocent god's name into a demonic entity in his short story Dagon. Now, the Mehrunes part is a bit more speculative, and I admit I may be stretching it with this one, but perhaps coincidentally, Mer in Persian is an alternative name for Mithra, a Zoroastrian deity associated with the burning sun, and much like many things in that religion, fire. In sharp contrast to the destructive Mehrunes Dagon and the grim vengefulness of Malacath, Mephala operates with a distinct subtlety from the shadows. Otherwise known as the Web Spinner and Plot Weaver, this Daedra's spheres are unsurprisingly secrets, deceit, manipulation, murder, and sex, although that last aspect has been less and less emphasized over the game series as Bethesda continues to sanitize their products. The immediate logical conclusion is that Mephala seems to overlap greatly with another Daedric prince, the previously mentioned Boethiah, whose spheres are also deceit, murder, and schemes. Indeed, both Boethiah and Mephala are considered good Daedra by the Dark Elves along with Azura, and worked together to form Chimer and eventually modern Dunmer society. The distinction between the two can best be seen in the more flattering version of Trinamach's downfall. While Boethiah faced him head-on, Mephala struck from the shadows, wounding the Aldmer hero from the back. This highlights the difference between the two princes. Boethiah, while not as destructive and blunt as Mehrunes Dagon, seeks changes in existing order through violent confrontation and open rebellion, her betrayals and deceit advancing the strong and culling the weak. The corruption of Malacath was done in plain sight as a powerful message of defiance of the Aldmer culture. Mephala, then, is far more subtle. She often secretly interferes in mortal affairs, viewing Mundus as an interconnected web, pulling at threads and influencing the fate of the mortal world. The spinner thrives on secrets and dark plots, manipulating others from the shadows. While Boethiah views murder as open battle and a test of strength, to Mephala it is a delicate art. It is under her influence that the infamous Morag Tong was founded, a guild of hired unalivers responsible for the murder of countless key figures in Tamrielic politics. The shadowy organization has completely changed the political landscape of the continent through high-profile assassinations, even ushering a new era with the death of an imperial potentate. Widely worshipped by the pre- and post-tribunal Dunmer, Mephala is also revered by groups of various assassins and so-called spider cults that operate from the shadows, often using seduction as a powerful tool, in line with Mephala's domain. Those that please the Daedra are blessed with the spinner's gifts, most famous among which is a sinister artifact known as the Ebony Blade. The weapon of choice of every weeb that plays Skyrim, this katana absorbs the life essence of those it strikes, eventually corrupting and turning the wielder themselves insane. Mephala herself resides in the realm of Spiral Skeen, a plane of oblivion often resembling a dark, sprawling cavern, a reflection of the arachnid Daedra. Scholars speculate that it is also modeled after the same manner as the planet Nirn, having a central fundamental tower structure in the middle of the realm. The Skeen is crawling with various insectoid Daedra, as well as the intelligent humanoid Spider Kith, Mephala's servants. The real-life inspirations for Mephala are many, Bethesda drawing on numerous strands to form the web of influences that is the Daedric Prince of Spiders. The multiple trickster deity influences previously mentioned are all applicable here, of course. However, Mephala's uniquely arachnid aspect sets her apart from the inspirations for Boethiah or Clavicus Vile. The Akan religion and folklore, originating from West Africa and eventually spreading to the Caribbean, has a remarkably similar figure to Mephala. Anansi, literally translating to spider from the Akan language, is a trickster figure, often associated with deceit, wit, and cunning, and is known to outsmart powerful opponents, such as other gods, in line with Mephala's deceitful and backstabbing nature. Spider-like figures occur in many other cultures also, notably the spider grandmother in many Native American traditions, like the Hopi and Navajo. While much more benevolent than Mephala, the spider grandmother is too associated with cunning and wit, as well as guiding her human children, much like Mephala guided the early Chimer, and eventually the Dunmer. The spider Dami-Mommy's connection to both sex and manipulation represents the ever-ubiquitous femme fatale trope found across multiple pieces of media. Focusing on real-life religions, though, such archetypes are quite common, notably the figure of Lilith, who, possibly drawing on ancient Mesopotamian influences, according to certain Jewish folklores, was the first wife of Adam, created from the same dust as he was. Expelled from heaven for disobedience and replaced with Eve, made from Adam's rib, the figure of Lilith became associated with demons as a succubus, a supernatural seductress that manipulates weak-minded mortals. As for the name, Mephala seems to derive directly from Mephistopheles, the Faustian demon associated with trickery and lies, the "ala" ending adding a feminine twist to the demonic entity. At this point, you may have noticed a certain trend start to emerge. Most members of the Daedric pantheon embody chaos, temptation, or deceit in some form, with a complete disregard for the lives of mortals. By almost every objective metric, Daedra are an evil and destructive force, which makes those of the pantheon that break this mold, even if slightly, all the more interesting. Meridia is the Daedric prince of life and light, the bright lady, the deity of infinite energies, harbinger of dawn, and the one responsible for shattering my eardrums at some point of every playthrough.
A new hand touches the beacon.
Most often associated with living energies and radiant light, as well as purity and order, and to a lesser extent, even time, Meridia is one of the few princes that has a somewhat benevolent reputation, although this is still Daedra we are dealing with, and much like light can illuminate and purify, it can also blind and burn. Meridia is one of the few Daedric princes that does not share the same origin as the rest of the pantheon. Initially, she was the daughter of Magnus, the god of magic, and one of the Magnagi, a family of primal spirits that fled Mundus to the divine realm of Aetherius soon after the creation of the mortal realm. For consorting with illicit spectra, implied to be other Daedra, Meridia was cast out of heaven, and so the wayward daughter became Daedra herself. It is most likely that these Magna G roots of Meridia that separate her radiant persona from her dark and sinister step-siblings in the Daedric pantheon. Characterized by her burning hatred for the undead in all their forms, Meridia's prime directive is eliminating all forms of unlife. To her, necromancy and the process of reanimating a corpse is an obscene corruption of life's natural flow. Meridia's crusade against the horror of undeath and her generally PR-friendly brand of light and purity often misleads mortals in believing her to be a benevolent goddess. The reality of the Lady of Light is in truth a lot more dark. Meridia's hatred for undeath does not arise from compassion, a concept alien to Daedra in general, but from disgust. Intolerant of any kind of disorder, The self-righteous and obsessive goddess loathes anything she deems impure, which includes things like mortal defiance and free will. Viewing mortals as nothing more than disposable instruments, Meridia is known to cleanse some of her followers of their free will to become the purified, slaves to the Daedra. And let's not forget Meridia's support of the Aelite terrorist state and her patronage of Umaril the Unfeathered, the ancient enemy of Pelinal Whitestrake and all of humankind. When Meridia was cast out of Aetherius, she carved her own sphere from the chaos of oblivion. The realm became known as the Colored Rooms, and it is said to resemble a coral reef and a vast field of floating rocks. Populated by Aurorans and Golden Saints, the associated Lesser Daedra of Meridia, the Colored Rooms is perhaps the only plane of oblivion to be described by the souls of the damned as pretty boring. Widely worshipped by the now extinct Aelids, there are plenty of cults that still follow the Lady of Light. The champions that earn the favor of Meridia are blessed with one of her artifacts, chief among which is the legendary blade Dawnbreaker. Forged from holy light, the blade was designed to be particularly effective against the enemies of the Radiant Lady, the undead. As for the real-life inspiration behind Meridia, she appears to be one of the more straightforward, conventional deities, drawing heavily on archetypes of light, purity, and judgment. The radiant and often winged visage of Meridia, a purifier of evil, immediately brings to mind Abrahamic angel influences. The fiery seraphim, burning angels that help God maintain order, as well as Archangel Michael specifically, the leader of the heavenly hosts, the fighter against corruption and impurity, echo in the Daedric Prince. There is even an element of Lucifer, who was cast out of heaven, much like Meridia was cast out of Aetherius. Curiously, prior to being handed his 2-week notice and finding a new role as Satan, Lucifer was also known as Morningstar, the bringer of dawn, just like Meridia is. Biblical references aside, multiple cultures have deities associated with light and purity. The Greek Apollo associated with sun and purity, as well as the solar god Surya from Hinduism, bearer of divine light. More close and interesting parallels come from the Egyptian pantheon. The creator deity Ra, the god of sun and order, corresponds with Meridia and her themes. Moreover, the daughter of Ra, Sekhmet, another solar deity, is known to breathe fire and cause plagues, while at the same time being called upon to ward off disease, a duality much in line with the Daedra in question. Finally, it is worth mentioning the connections to Zoroastrianism, an ancient Iranian religion. Not only is the theme of the dichotomy of good and evil present in its two central deities, but fire is also considered sacred and pure by Zoroastrians. Some communities consider the dead to be polluting and are purified by being left in towers of silence, exposed to the sun and birds of prey. In terms of the name Meridia, that too is relatively straightforward. In Latin, meridis means midday or noon, the position of the sun at its brightest point, emphasizing the Daedra's role as a deity of light. And that, my friends, brings about the end of the first part of this series. I initially planned on making this one video, however, it might have stretched well over 2 hours in length. I do apologize for the delay in uploading, and hopefully the second part will come much sooner, as the script is already finished. A huge thank you to all of you for your continuous support, especially during my absence. And, of course, a huge shout out to my channel members, Giant Gimli, Two Step, and The Lubricator. Thank you for watching, and, as always, until we meet again.